All right, I'm diving in. Thanks for joining today, everybody. I know this was a little bit short notice, and like 2020 has done, we just don't get to experience the end of the year like we normally do as a company. Um, I think our staff has done a great job of creating some meaningful things, and we have another one of those to come on January 7th. Hopefully, you're all able to join for that. But it really, just to address it, it just doesn't feel the same to not be able to gather in small groups like in our teams or as a staff, and certainly not as a company. Like me, some of you have maybe been, Facebook has been reminding you that it was a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, at our year-end party at the Mavericks, which is so much fun. So bummer that we won't be able to do that, but the 7th will be, I think, a lot of fun, and we look forward to gathering at some point in the hopefully near future as a company. So thanks for doing it virtually today. Just as a reminder, the three things that we'll hit today. Number one is really just a COVID, not hindsight, because COVID is not done, but with 9 months of hindsight, kind of what we thought might happen as of March in the real estate market, and what has happened and what looks like it's going to. So that's number one. Number two is just more specific to our company, growth that we've experienced, where we see that headed. And then number three is transitions that obviously we've had a big end of the year transition here within the company, particularly with our managing broker. So we're gonna hit those three topics and hopefully have Q&A for each one. So for the first one, I'll ask you to rewind your mind to March 15th. Go back. This is schools are shutting down, sports are being canceled. March Madness was canceled. We had the first lockdown. The governor pretty quickly declared our industry as essential, but nobody really understood probably what that meant. And we had quite a few brokerage calls at that point. We got into the rhythm of having one a week. But if you recall, that first week, we were having more than one a week. We're actually having two or three. And a lot of this was built on uncertainty of what was going to happen. And so I think if anybody at that point in time, as of March 15th, would have or could have predicted what the next 9 months in the real estate industry would have looked like, they were lucky because their predictions were all across the board, and no one could honestly say that they knew what was going to happen. But I think a lot of people, us included, really felt like, you know what, to be wise, to be smart business owners, we have to consider that the rest of this year could be a really, really big hit to revenue, right? Just, I think at that moment in time, there was this question of, are transactions going to be able to continue like they normally do? And we saw about a 2-week freeze while people tried to figure out what was going on. So in that 2-week period, really the second half of March, there was this, is this what the rest of the year is going to look like? And then if you don't know what happened, what happened then is that really by the end of April, after about 6 weeks, the market was not only back to normal, but we saw a delayed spring. So March, April, and May, pretty much always the busiest 90-day stretch in our marketplace. And really what happened is that just got pushed back about 6 weeks, which then landed in the most active August that I believe Indianapolis has ever seen. Certainly my 12 years in the industry, the busiest August that our market has ever seen. I think a lot of that was because this pent up activity. And then to end the year, we're looking at this saying, okay, transaction count year over year is up, meaning there was more houses bought and sold in our marketplace in 2020 than there were in 2019. Prices, the median price up by 15%. We 3 months in a row over the summer saw a record median price. So June, July, and August, 3 months consecutively, we saw the highest 30-day period median price that Indianapolis has ever seen. And think about this for a moment. Year over year, for prices to have gone up by 15%, a typical or healthy real estate market is going to see 4% appreciation per year. So an economist would expect to see a real estate market over a long period of time increase by 4% per year in value and price. To see our median price jump by 15% in a year, it's essentially unheard of in a market like ours. And so 3 months in a row to set the record and to see that jump by 15%, that's a really big deal. Again, if you had told me on March 15th that that's what was going to happen, it's certainly not what I was betting on. Just for the record, I didn't actually make a bet on this, but it's not what I would have anticipated. And so at one level, I think for our industry, we have to hit pause at the end of the year and be grateful for that. Because I know every one of you has a neighbor or a relative or a friend or probably multiple neighbors, relatives, and friends that are in industries that were nowhere near as fortunate as ours. Obviously, anything to do with travel or tourism, hospitality, service industries, even some people in like elective medical procedures. So there's a lot of industries that took the type of hit that we thought maybe we would. And so it's created this bizarro economy that, normally recessions are recessions. You all know what I mean by that? Like normally a recession may not impact every industry in the same way, but they typically have a broader, more consistent up or down. Whereas in this situation, it's certain industries had record years like ours, and others had the worst year, in our lifetime. So I think that's something to be grateful for. It's something to be considerate of, obviously, for our friends and neighbors, many of whom are in industries that weren't as fortunate. But to reflect on that, I think it's a lesson that generally things are out of our control in terms of what's going to happen in our industry, how we respond to it, and our mentality is within our control. But it also, I think, teaches us a lesson that things are probably less predictable than we think they are. It's always true in hindsight. I think it does speak to the overall health and vitality, or the importance of housing as an industry. I think in all of our lifetimes in 2008, we saw the biggest negative correction that housing has ever seen in the United States. So that might skew our perception just a bit, that in a 100-year history, the biggest negative correction that our industry had seen happened in our lifetime, but yet recovered in about 24 months. So we're in an industry that withstood its biggest negative and corrected in about 2 years. And then in the middle of a pandemic, the public has basically said, this is such a critical part to life, buying and selling a house, that if we can find a way to do it safely, this is still going to happen. And so I don't think that means we're immune to future negative turns as an industry. We're not. We're actually probably due for one. But I think it is kind of a lesson on the stability of housing, a little bit in hindsight. I also think it begs a really good question about 2021. How many of you, you could show your hands if you want, or you could just kind of figuratively raise your hand. How many of you have had people asking, what does this mean for the next year of housing, right? Because the last 9 months has felt like this massive question mark, and it didn't go the way most of us thought it would. So what does this mean in the next year? And if you don't take anything away from 2020 other than this, I think this would be okay. Perhaps the one lesson we could learn as realtors is don't offer concrete predictions of what's going to happen in the future in the housing market. You might be right, you might be wrong. There are brilliant, genius intelligence level economists that spend their entire life trying to predict the housing market in the United States, and they often get it wrong. No offense to any of you, but I'm certain that none of us on this call has the capacity to try to predict the housing market like they do. So I think one of the lessons might be, I don't know what's going to happen, is an okay thing to say. It doesn't speak to a lack of intelligence. I think it actually, in a lot of ways, speaks to a realism and an intelligence about what's happened in the past. The second thing is, I think as you have people asking about the future of the industry, I think this gives you an interesting data point to say, you know what, my ability to predict what will happen in a certain defined short period of time isn't very high. So if somebody said, what's spring of 21 going to be like? I don't know. However, I can speak to the resiliency of the housing market. Look at this 100-year history, right? Look at what happened in 2020. Doesn't mean we won't have a downturn. It means that the idea of a sustained recession in the housing market and downturn, it's really never happened. So you could point to that. But as I look at this, guys, I think of four things. We've talked about this a little bit, but kind of at the end of 2020, looking into 21, partially in light of COVID, I think of four things. Two are more specific to Indianapolis, two are more general about the housing market. So the generals about the housing market. Number one is interest rates. Clearly, interest rates play an enormous factor in our industry. And I think the data suggests interest rates play a much larger factor in our industry than a global pandemic. So if interest rates are going to be below 3, if most homeowners have the opportunity to borrow 30-year fixed money under 3%, they are going to be inclined to move. And that clearly incentivizes activity. And that is something that is out of our control, but it does appear that the federal government is willing to, it appears to me, they're willing to indefinitely subsidize interest rates to the point to incentivize homeownership activity. So that's number one, is that's a really big deal. You can't predict what's going to happen with interest rates, but you could say to a consumer, this is a part of what keeps the housing market turning. The second thing is unemployment. I think this is a big variable. I think this is a part of why we were really concerned in March, right? I think one of the correct predictions in March was a lot of people are going to be out of work really fast, and they were, and they still are. Unemployment is still very high. I think there's reason to be optimistic about what unemployment will be, say, in 6 or 9 months, but it's high right now, and typically high unemployment has a negative impact on the housing market. This is what happened in 2008. High unemployment will have a negative impact on the housing market. And in 2020, it didn't. I think there is a legit question, though, to how long is that sustainable? Would unemployment eventually have a negative impact on activity in the housing market? I think it's a good question. We don't know the answer, but I think that's something to consider as you look forward. I don't know if, I dig into stuff like this because I find it interesting. One of the things that we've kind of learned at the end of 2020 is that, so typically you might try to track unemployment with the housing market as two kind of simple numbers. But one of the things we've learned is that in 2008, unemployment actually wasn't as high as it is right now. though it was a different category of employee who was unemployed in 2008. And this is not a better and worse, but a part of why I don't think it's impacted our industry as much, I actually, maybe this is worse. For us as realtors, it's probably quote unquote better. Generally speaking, this might actually be worse. In 2008, a lot of homeowners were unemployed. A significant chunk of the unemployed workforce in 2020 are not as likely to be homeowners because they're service industry. I think for the impact to like the most vulnerable people in our society, this is very bad news. But I think that's one of the reasons that the high unemployment hasn't had the same impact that it did in 08. For example, in 08, you saw a lot of financial services, banking, anybody that was in retirement planning, like those sorts of industries were experiencing very high unemployment. Real estate brokers, for example. Whereas in 2020, the demographics are different. The average income of the chunk of unemployed workforce is different. So that dives into it. But I do think the high unemployment is a question about what's going to happen in the housing market. So that was number two. The two that have more to do with Indianapolis. So the third, but the first about Indianapolis is the combination of inventory and prices. Even though our market's slowed down a little bit here at the end of the year, generally speaking, our inventory is still very, very low. And so if you're looking for a reason to think that 2021 will feel different between buyers and sellers, I don't see it yet. I only see it in one subcategory of our marketplace. Every other part of our marketplace, inventory is still so low that I think buyers are going to have that same sort of difficult experience, particularly at medium price points next spring, and that prices will likely continue to go up. We don't know that, but the inventory would suggest that's going to happen. The subcategory, if anybody wants to take a stab at what subcategory of our industry is inventory very clearly climbing and prices not going up, and maybe the opposite is happening in this subcategory. Anyone want to take a stab at that? Eric very might be right. I should have clarified. I do mean a subcategory of residential. I think there is a subcategory of commercial that may experience this too, and they're very similar. This retail commercial. Devin's right. Stefan said luxury. I think he raises a good point. The higher price points aren't moving quickly, but higher price points in Indianapolis have never moved quickly. There's always a significant difference between how long it takes a $500,000 house to sell and a $250,000 house. So the slowness of luxury isn't new. That's just what Indianapolis has always had. Jamie New Homes, this is it. It continues to blow my mind. I was speaking with a VP of Estridge Homes 2 weeks ago. They are setting records month after month after month. They're building more homes than they've ever built. They're pulling more permits. They raise their prices every single month, and they're not slowing down. It's crazy. I think retail commercial would be a good example, but I think Devin's right. It's condos downtown. There does appear to be a climbing inventory of condos. It's a pretty small subset though. Like it can be very important to the individual for sure, but it's a small subset. So I think outside of that, I don't see inventory climbing, and we'll see what next year is like. The fourth and the second to do with Indianapolis is just the affordability piece. Like I know we saw a 15% price increase in our median price year over year, and that's a really big deal. But Indianapolis still sits as a very affordable alternative to a lot of marketplaces. And I'm not trying to make a prediction here, but there are a lot of people out there that think one of the impacts that COVID might have kind of nationwide is increased transiency. So what I mean by that is that so the concept that someone who's living in New York or San Francisco or DC or Boston might be questioning, like, wait a minute, do I actually need to live here? I work for a large nonprofit in DC. I work for a tech company in San Francisco. I work for a financial institution in New York. Do I actually have to live in this city to work for this company or this organization? We're starting to see examples of that. And if that happens at a large scale, cities like Indianapolis will be the benefactors. So this was an interesting part of the conversation I was having with the VP at Estridge, was they have always seen a notable portion of their houses sell to people that were moving from Chicago. They track this. He said, we've never seen at scale people moving from the East and West Coast. They said that's where the majority of their buyers are coming from right now, is high density areas on the East and West Coast. Building a house in Westfield, Indiana with Estridge. You don't want to make a big prediction about the future, but I think that speaks to cost of living, affordability, like what you can buy here for any given dollar amount. Jonna and Stefan are referencing kind of small scale and big scale examples. I think New York City, I actually, this is where I really nerd out on this. The Freakonomics podcast had an episode that said, is Manhattan dead? Was the title of the podcast. Spoiler alert that their answer was no, Manhattan is not dead. People have thought Manhattan was dead in the past. It'll be fine. Who knows? But they have seen a population decrease for sure this year. They're not all moving to Indianapolis, but I think that's where the affordability of our marketplace could work to our advantage. Okay, so that was a lot of my thoughts. Perhaps you don't take anything away from that outside of the highlights for me are, number one, it's always okay to say you don't know what's going to happen in the housing market because it's the truth. Number two, we still have a very low inventory of affordable houses, and we're an affordable marketplace. I think those are the two keys. If you want to drop a third in there, I would say it would be the impact of interest rates. They kind of, I don't know what else to say other than they trump everything else. Low interest rates trump everything else. Phil's facial expression when I said that was exactly what I was thinking in my head. Thank you, Phil. Okay, I'm hitting pause. Thoughts and questions from you with 9 months of hindsight about COVID. How are you feeling going into 2021? Do you think consumers ask you things that you don't know the answer to? Do they expect you to know more than you do? How are you feeling about trying to gauge our marketplace right now after all that? You can unmute yourself or you can chime into the chat.
This is not a question, just a comment. I appreciate, Mark, you explaining the difference with the unemployment today versus 2008. That helps this make a lot more sense to me. You know, obviously the interest rates, all that, but the who was unemployed is playing a big role in why we did not feel what we felt. And so even though this is very uncertain times, that just makes more logical sense to me. to be able to understand it and then transfer that information to clients and stuff when I'm having conversations. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Eric asked, is there going to be a price adjustment with inventory still low? I think so, Eric. I think what we saw in 2020 is a sign of what the reality in Indianapolis is going to be for a long time. Again, in shorter periods of time, that's harder to predict. In other words, what's going to happen with prices in 2021, I think is actually harder to predict than what's going to happen with prices over the next decade. Some of you may have been on the brokerage call. This was a couple months ago. An economist did a study on housing supply, like state by state. We know nationwide inventory is low, but they boiled it down to state by state. And Indiana, among the middle of the country, if you take the middle half of the country and say by what percentage is supply low in that state relative to demand, of the middle 25 states, we had the second lowest supply. I think it was Minnesota that had the highest of the middle 25. We were the second, which what that means is we just don't have enough houses. Low interest rates, not enough houses, affordable entry point, like prices are going up. I think that there's no such thing as a sure thing, but if anybody is surprised in a decade that Indianapolis has a much higher average price than we do now, I'd kind of say they weren't paying attention. Yeah, Eric asked if is the rental market going to change up where landlords start selling property? Boy, it's been a while, hasn't it? It's been hard to buy good rentals. I don't know. To me, if population is increasing in a city, landlords just aren't going to be very likely to sell because I think rents are going to keep going up. But I don't know. Curious if this is what Nashville and Austin have been experiencing in the last 5 to 10 years. Yeah, Kate, I think that's right. We're not like any other city. We're always going to be different, but there is, the Nashville, Austin, Denver, Portland, these cities that experienced a decade of significant price increase. And then like 10 years later, we're like, whoa, what happened? The conditions look like that's coming. Yes. Jamie, that is specific to our marketplace. Yeah. Prices have gone up nationally, but not like they have in Indianapolis. Yeah. Rex makes a good point. Inventory was incredibly low in 2020. It's possible that it could go even lower in 2021.
It's kind of crazy with the shortage of supplies at the moment and the price of building materials to have inventory so low because it's not a completely solvable situation. I mean, granted, like new builds are happening, but like, even the rehabbers that I work with, their cost of lumber's gone up. They can't get windows in. They can't, there's still a lot of houses in Indy to be redone depending on where you're looking at. There's still a lot of places that were residences that aren't habitable right now, but the mixture of like the low inventory with also the low inventory of supplies seems like a sticking point that's going to affect the market in some way.
Yeah, and they don't help each other, right? Low inventory of houses will lead to an increase in cost of lumber, for example, because the demand for lumber is going up. Trisha, you make another good point. Y'all know there's still 7,000 vacant houses in Marion County. Just think about that for a second. That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, 7,000 houses in in Marion County, and the city of Indianapolis owns a reasonable percentage of those 7,000. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to transition to topic 2. But if you have a question about kind of COVID and what's happening in the larger market, feel free to drop that into the chat. We'll try to make sure we come back to it. So topic number 2 is more specific to our brokerage, to Plat Collective, what the year has been like for us. And here's where even in March, I would have had optimistic predictions in terms of how our company was going to perform relative to our industry. Obviously, not knowing what the industry was going to do, but guys, it's incredible. A couple things to highlight. In 2019, our brokerage closed a little over 230 million in business. In 2020, we will close over 400 million. That is an enormous jump. Another number that really blows me away, and I'm so proud of and really grateful for. At the start of 2020, we had I think it was 69 or 70 realtors at the start of 2020. 27 of those 70, 27 out of the 70 more than doubled their business from 19 to 20. If I'm looking for one little snippet data point of something to cheer for, to be grateful for, celebrate in this year, 27 out of 70 doubling their business is unbelievable. FYI, that's impossible that sort of percentage would continue. That's like so outside the norm of growth curves. And cheers to you guys, right? That means a ton of you worked really hard, put plans into place, kind of bet on yourself to dive into the industry. We had I'd like to joke about this. We had a number of agents quit their day jobs this year, which is always something to celebrate. Assuming you wanted to quit your day job, but I think a lot of you did, while more than doubling their business. I've been there. I know what that's like. So as we look at the brokerage and we think about what this year has been, we saw an increase in our number of realtors. We saw an increase in our transaction volume, dollar volume. Our per realtor volume jumped significantly. So growth in every sense of it. In terms of our industry, just to give you, I don't know if this matters a whole lot to some of you, but it's an interesting reference point. In terms of MIBOR, in 2019, we were the 15th largest brokerage in our region. In 2020, we will be the 10th largest brokerage in our region. In Indianapolis, so if you just zero in on transactions that take place in the city of Indianapolis, we are currently the 3rd largest brokerage. I suppose you could say our sights set on number 2. We're gaining ground pretty quickly there towards number 2. And those things aren't indicative of what motivates you as realtors and what motivates us as a company. I really do see and hear and feel people being motivated by serving clients. But I also, y'all have heard me say this before, if we're motivated by serving clients really well, I think one of the kind of proofs or evidences of that is number growth. And so I think the client focus and the service to clients is paying off. in your businesses individually and for us as a company. And it's incredible. It's really exciting. And I don't see us falling off of that growth curve. I think as we look forward and say, are there a good amount of clients left for us to continue to grow our service and operation? Yes. I think our city is going to continue to grow. And I think the curve that we're on will continue. Do I think that we'll have 27 people more than double their business this year? Boy, it'd be amazing if we did. I know that we are going to have quite a few of you double your business. I've got the list. Maybe I could tell you if I think you're one of the ones that will double your business, but I see a lot of you doing the right things, a lot of people that are kind of ready for one of those big leaps next year. And we do tend to see that a lot. We tend to see people, it's fairly common for somebody to kind of make that, they sold 1.5 million this year and they're going to sell 5.5 next year. Because they're doing all the right things and it just takes some time, and all of a sudden they get the traction and boom, it takes off. So there's a lot to celebrate there and a lot to look forward to in terms of where I believe we're headed. Questions on that, thoughts or things that you're processing as you hear some of those company numbers, or as you think about where's that growth headed into the future. I also want to give Crystal a moment to give some of her perspective on growth and personal and company growth. But before I do that, unmute yourself, chime into the chat. What do you think about when you hear those sorts of numbers? Maybe I know several of the 27 that doubled their business are on this call. Maybe one of you could chime in. All you guys who doubled your business are choosing to be humble right now. Is that what's happening? Oh, that's well said, Jenny.
I think it's significant that you did. Sorry, my daughter's in the same room playing a video game. I don't know if you're catching her on the microphone too. I think it's significant that the brokerage had so much growth in the number of agents, but then had so many agents experience increases in business, because I know that that's always a fear when you're someplace and they start to grow. You're like, what? It's just like, that should be my business. It's that feeling of like scarcity rather than realizing that there's plenty of business to go around. And I feel like those numbers really express that, to have not only the brokerage go up in numbers and the number of agents go up, but the agent numbers so increased through that brokerage growth seems like really great.
That's a really great point, Tricia, is the relation between those two numbers. Sorry for the nerd statistic here, should there be a positive or negative correlation between those two? Because I think if you see a growth in agent count, but your per agent business isn't growing, that's a problem. It's a significant problem. My philosophy on this is that they should actually see a positive correlation, because one of the main values that an agent can get from their brokerage is being surrounded by good people that know what they're doing, that have resources to share. So yeah, I think it's significant. If you want to know, the one of those that is the more important to us as a brokerage is the per agent business volume. That's the one that has to grow. Because something's not working if that's not growing. And by the way, we'll see if this happens. Rex might actually know if this is going to happen. For the last 2 years, of the 25 largest brokerages, in our marketplace, think about this for a second, of the 25 largest brokerages in our marketplace, our per agent business has grown faster than any of them. So we were not the fastest growing brokerage last year. We were, I believe, the second fastest largest growing brokerage last year behind EXP. But for 2 years in a row, we have led the 25 largest in by what percentage did our per agent business grow? We will be very close in 2020 to number one on that list. I guess TBD if we rank that high. But yeah, Trisha, thanks for making that distinction. I'm just reading the chat here. Stefan, that's a great example there. Pivoting business to focus in on maybe just a different class, like kind of responding to where you're seeing the demand and servicing that's really great. Eric, great question. I do want to circle back to that. Don't let me forget it before we finish. Any other thoughts? Feel free to drop those into the chat just in regards to Plat growth. And we'll hit a little bit more of this on January 7th, just in terms of celebrating that and acknowledging many of you for significant growth and really great achievements this year. So we'll make more fun of it in January. Okay, transitioning to our third topic for today, which is transition. So the last 3 weeks have been a bit of a whirlwind and honestly quite the surprise. I have had the opportunity to talk to a number of you. I know that several other of our staff people, Rex, Rosie, Crystal, have as well. But I also think it's something that it's good and healthy to try to process as a group. So we have gone through a leadership change. So Jess Martin served as our managing broker for a little bit shy of a year. And we're thrilled to have Crystal in this role. I think there is, many of you have used the word presence when you describe Crystal, and I couldn't agree more. Crystal has an inherent leadership quality that I admire, and I think has the technical expertise, but honestly, the technical expertise in our industry is the easy part. No offense. But I think just the ability to coach and help someone transform themselves and their business, Crystal really has that. And so I'm thrilled to have her in that role, leading us as a company as managing broker. But just to be honest, guys, as of a month ago, we loved Crystal and kind of had her slated for a role like this in the company, but didn't think it was going to happen in 2020. So it did. It caught us off guard, and I'm thrilled with the way that it has worked out. But it's not what we were expecting. And so I've had the opportunity to answer questions for some people, and we've processed this in some ways, but I do want to open up for questions about, what the last 30 days has been like. We've shared a lot of this information, but I know it kind of comes in bits and pieces. And so happy to process that. I will say that, like, hey, in our industry, it happens. Like, I think that's one thing to acknowledge, that although we don't always look forward to it or celebrate it, and many times we don't look forward to these things, people do come and go. People make changes. Y'all know that our industry sees a lot of movement. It's just one of the realities. And so while it is a surprise, it's also okay to acknowledge that it happens and things change. I I also try to take the philosophy, and I really do believe this, that change is healthy. It's not always enjoyable. Like change can suck, but generally speaking, I think in a professional setting, when you get on the other end, I think I just
We there, you're back.
um, y'all heard the speech on change. Did you catch that part? Okay, good. Yeah, I was saying that I think change really does help people end up in the right place. I think it's actually stagnation that runs the risk of being in the wrong place. But that doesn't mean that change is enjoyable or smooth or perfect. Because I think the concept of change being perfect or easy or smooth, it's a myth. It just doesn't work that way. It's rocky. So I want to ask Crystal to speak on growth of the company and what she's feeling about in going into 2021. But before we do that, I want to open it up and say, is there like information that you feel like you want to have that you don't? You can drop that into the chat and I'll do my best to address it. I'd also say, like, hey, open door. That's any of the staff people, but I'm specifically speaking for me and Rex here. Rex is nodding in agreement. That anytime you want to reach out to us to chat about what's happened in the last 30 days, like not only am I open to that, but I welcome it. I think that would be a great conversation. So don't feel pressure to do that, but if you have the inclination, please do. But yeah, here in this setting, is there anything that you feel like would be helpful for us to address about that? Okay, 30 seconds is about all I can take. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to ask Crystal to share about what she's thinking and feeling and what has her excited for her role and for the company in 2021. But while she's doing that, if you want to drop something into the chat that you'd say, hey, just in regards to the transition, more info on this would be helpful, or how are you feeling about this? So window is still open for Q&A. Drop it into the chat. Crystal, how are you feeling about next year?
And the crowd goes wild. Woo! So I'm excited. Thanks, Mark, while you're on vacation, for doing this for all of us. I love it. It's good to see some of your faces. It's been so much fun reaching out, calling and calling and calling and calling. Many of you leaving a voicemail. If I have not called you yet, if you have not got a voicemail, don't worry, you will hear my voice before Christmas. I promise. I really love working with Rex, Mark, and Mark, because I think one of the fun things about us trio is going to be we all have different styles. And so I love diversity in every form of that. So I think it's going to be good. So I am very transparent and sometimes to a fault. And so, because once it's out, you can't take it back, right? So take this all with love. But my conversations with you all individually have left me feeling very excited about the growth and the gleam in your eye that I sense you have. And then also a little puzzled of how I can take your concern as your managing broker and not fix it, but really take it and apply it to make Plat continue to grow and be what Mark and Rex has envisioned it being. And so I want to use this quick little analogy because I love the growth and I love to hear the word growth, but some of you guys, your eyes are glossed over when you even think of growth because you love, you know, things being the way they are. But I want you to picture like a nice hot bath. Like everybody likes a nice hot bath usually, right? And you can sit in that water and it feels so great, but after a while, if you don't do anything, it just starts to get stagnant and it's not so great, right? So we got to let a little water out, right? So you could add some more hot water. And that's always my vision with growth is it's natural and it's good to let a little bit out so you can add some more and it keeps it nice and comfortable. But if we were to stay and do nothing, we just can't continue. Like if we just did nothing, there is you couldn't even remain what you were. And so I always like to use two companies, two organizations as an example for me to help with growth. And that's McDonald's and hospitals. They're always taking applications, always, even if they're not hiring. And the reason is because they understand 5 things are going to happen just at different speeds that they can't control. You're always going to have people that die. It sucks, but it's part of life, right? You're always going to have people getting promoted. Some people are promoting out. In our sense, is promoting out of brokerages, sometimes starting their own. It's healthy, it's natural, right? But when they promote out, it's like, who's going to take that place? The other thing is you always have people demoting. You may have someone that's up in a high position at one point, and then they decide, life has changed. I want to be down here. I was a big player. Now I want to be a smaller player. You also have people that just simply quit. They quit. They decide this is not what I want to do anymore. And then lastly, the 5th one is people move. People move to other places, states, or whatever. And so those 5 things are always happening. And if you're not a company or an organization that is always looking for applicants, you're always looking for more talent, then unfortunately, when those things happen, it can catch you off guard. So I'm excited that Plat is not one of those companies that's trying to remain stagnant. We are wanting to grow, we are growing, but I love the strategy with the growth. And so as your managing broker, my thoughts, my vision in short for our growth, your growth, is to do what we've already been doing, and that is to do it even more intentionally. That is deep and wide. Deep means you, taking you deeper in your business. For some of you, it's doubling. For some of you, it's finding more fulfillment in your business, allowing you the opportunities to mentor, coach, teach, whatever that looks like. And then there's the wide part, and that's adding new people, new agents. Just know that I am not a throw mud up against the wall and see what it sticks kind of girl. So for me, adding people, I am going to be calling out to you to be participants in that. And so that kind of looks like recruiting, which is not a bad word, by the way. Recruiting is just the highest form of flattery. It really is. And for some of you, you're like, I am not into that. I'm never doing that. And that's totally fine because we probably don't want you to do it if you feel that way. I love you. I'm just keeping it real with you, right? But for some of you that just want to have a direct pulse on the culture of Plat and our family and how we grow, then you may want to know a little bit more like, how do I just kind of intentionally, but not aggressively, have a say in who's coming into our company? I'm looking forward to doing that type of training with you all going into 2021. Basic recruiting training, just like what does it look like on a basic level? And then for some of you, like, no, that's my jam. I want to recruit. And so working with team leaders and people wanting to build team and so forth like that, actually providing structured training on that. And so my last little words on recruiting that I want to share is recruiting in a nutshell to me. And the reason I feel I can speak to this is that's really how I made my income in Mary Kay and grew a large organization, is through recruiting, but doing it in a way that people don't feel yucky, nasty, or feel like you're like a stalker. And so my last comment I want to say on recruiting is just, it's a layering process. And it's kind of like dating, where you know how some people give it up on the first date and some have like a 90-day rule. Just saying, right? We're all adults, right? Um, Literally, recruiting and layering is the same way. You can present the best offer to someone and they just, in their mind, they don't say yes right away. That's just their thing. And some people need to be layered. They have that 90-day rule for business too. And sometimes we need to know how to not take that personal and recognize that, and know how to date people, layer them for a while. And so I'm so glad that I made Mark laugh and kind of blush. That was amazing. So I told you guys I am very transparent, and I can't be apologetic for who I am. This is who is your managing broker. But you get what I'm saying, don't you? You get the picture. And that is, everyone's different. It's not about what you're selling, giving, or offering. It's about sometimes that other person, how they process it. So I'm excited. My training will not always be inappropriate in that type of manner, but I want you guys to hear my heart, and I want you to see me when I say, I see you guys, I hear you. I have loved getting to know some of you so much better. And this is our brokerage. And I look forward to making it even more of what we want, what we stand for, and making sure it's visible, it's loud amongst the brokerage, and it's even louder in the city. And so I love you guys, and I'm very excited. Thanks for all the love and the acceptance. It is amazing. You guys really energize me, and so I'm looking forward to giving that energy back to you.
Crystal, we love you too. And for the record, add to the list of things that Crystal can do that I can't is effectively use illustrations about 90 days or bathtubs. So it's a very long list and growing of things that Crystal can do that I can't. I also love the fact that while Crystal was sharing, I got multiple text messages from the people on this call telling me how much they love Crystal and in the chat. That's really great. Yeah, thanks, Crystal. Joel, Crystal, you may have caught this. Crystal referenced this. Jess has left and started her own brokerage. Happy to share more about that, but I think that answers your question. I don't want to forget Eric's question, which is kind of back to topic number one. But as we kind of wrap up, taking a look at brokerage growth and transitions, other comments or questions? You still got a couple minutes to drop that into the chat. And I would say too, just to reiterate, I don't know, if there's a question that feels weird to ask in this setting, I get it. Shoot me a text or give me a call. Do the same with Rex, or I think Crystal or Rosie probably too could be good people to approach with some of those questions. So I'll keep an eye on the chat here for a minute, but yeah, Eric asked about kind of where Indianapolis is seeing housing growth, particularly with new builds out in the suburbs, and what does that mean for Plat and our future growth plans. And you know, I will say this: I still think our competitive advantage as a company rests on a couple things. One of them being City of Indianapolis expertise. Now, I have never believed that comes at the expense or the exclusion of activity outside of Indianapolis. So pretty much every year, the numbers have turned out to be pretty similar, that we do about 80% of our business in an Indianapolis address and 20% of our business outside of Indianapolis address. And the competitive advantage for a realtor is always going to be primarily the relationship you have with the client. The better the relationship with you have, the more competitive advantage you're going to have with that person. And that's how people decide who they're going to hire. I view our city expertise and proximity to be an important secondary competitive advantage. And I think a lot of you could attest to opportunities that you've had with a buyer or seller because they know you to be a city kind of insider, if you will, that you know things or understand things about the city. I bet many of you have had this happen where someone that you know is working with a realtor who's outside their expertise in the city of Indianapolis, and they approach you and ask you for advice. This has happened to me quite a few times. So Eric, I always want there to be that secondary competitive advantage that I think plays a significant role for us as a company and you as individuals, but never for that to be at the exclusion of opportunities to work in the context of relationships outside of Indianapolis, new builds or otherwise. But I also think the city has as much growth potential as the suburbs. I don't know if you all have heard me reference this stat, but the majority of you live in Center Township. A lot of you don't live in Center Township, but the majority of you do. Did y'all know that Center Township is still only at half of the population that it had in 1950? 70 years ago, the city was twice the population. The core of the city was twice the population that it is right now. And I look at that and say, I think there's tremendous growth potential. Basically, what's happened in the last decade is that the decline in the population has stopped. Center Township is no longer declining in population. It might now be growing kind of incrementally. So I look at that as an opportunity. But I think all of us will continue to do business outside of Indianapolis, and I think we're set up to do that well. So if you look at that, that's 20% may not sound like a big number, but when you consider that we did 400 million in business this year, that means that combined we did over 80 million of business outside of Marion County. That's a lot of transactions. So hopefully I answered that question, Eric. Happy to chat more about that anytime in the future too. You guys, our goal is an hour. I know this was ambitious to hit that agenda, particularly given the amount of time you could spend talking about COVID and its impact in our industry. Anything else? Again, reiterating, open door. Would love to chat with you further in person. Well, probably not in person, but individually. Always feel free to reach out. Rosie wants me to hand it over to her, I think.
Yes, we just had, can everyone hear me? I'm on my phone, which I'm usually not. Okay. I just had a question come in from Phil. And Phil, I'm hoping you wanted me to address this on the call rather than just text you back. Feel free to interrupt me if not. But Phil just asked if Crystal's job comes with like a specific term, like a time commitment. Mark, can you speak to that at all?
30 years.
As long as humanly possible.
She hasn't seen the contract yet. No, it's coming. No, Phil, no. As long as Crystal will have us, I think is the answer. Thanks, Devin. Yeah, and Eric, I see that. Open to it, absolutely. Devin, I think it's if you all don't know this by now, there's very little that I'm not open to considering because I think being static just never makes sense. It's like taking a nasty bath, I think is what Crystal said earlier. I think it's going to be a continual evaluation of what's the best way to set up that secondary competitive advantage. So kind of acknowledging that relationship is always going to be the key. The secondary is how can we set up people to succeed as a company? So that's the tension. But I think we have to be open to considering that.
Something I would love to add there is I think I've seen this evolution within Plat since I've joined. Especially as we were doing the rebrand, we focused a lot on calling ourselves an urban brokerage. That's something that felt like part of our DNA. And while it still is, I would say we now feel like we're focused more on the city, on Indianapolis as a whole, rather than just like specific urban neighborhoods. I don't know if that feels helpful for you, but it's kind of like helped me kind of realign my brain or talk about Plat differently as I'm talking to agents who are interested in coming to Plat. That we while we are an urban brokerage, like I think we exist more now as like a city focused brokerage. And I would love, and I'm sure Emily would love to hear from you guys as well, like how our language could be more helpful around that. And like if there are ways that would feel more inclusive or in terms of like the areas that we serve. So yeah, always open to feedback, but I thought that might be helpful for you guys to hear like how that's changed for us as a team.
Looks like Rob has his hand up.
God, you're going to hear me speak. I hope I don't piss anyone off. I'm good at it, guys.
Somebody mute Rob.
You can't. I can do it myself. I think the question is, yes, I agree that when we first started, especially as Nottingham, it was a very urban, brokerage. That's what we were. And then even 2 years ago when we transitioned to Plat, it was still very urban. And even in our tagline or something as Plat, it's "We are for the city." I think some of the questions, I know that Eric and I have spoken about it, and it looks like Devin and maybe some others are, as we're continuing to grow the company with new agents, and not only new agents, but market share, there is that whole donut county. I mean, I did 3 or 4 in Hendricks County. I did a couple 3 this year up in that north one. Hamilton, thank you. And
You obviously know it very well.
and a couple down there in that Greenwood area. I pride myself on really just being downtown, and that's, where I want to work. But of course, I'll whore myself and go to those donut counties. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the big questions, though, is, if we're going to, if we want to, grow as far as market share, to get up there closer to Tucker. They all have branches in these outlying counties, and I'm not saying go open a bunch of offices, but I think that, one thing, to start maybe changing the focus of is to just, really not focus on the "we are for the city," but maybe "we are for the donut." Hell, I don't know. Emily, that's your deal, but just some thoughts there. There, I spoke, and I hope I didn't piss anybody off.
There's some good nuggets in there to take away for the quote board. Thank
We
you.
are for the donut.
We are for the donut. Yes.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's going to end up on a billboard at some point, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Guys, we are 13 minutes past. So I'm going to suggest that we close our call today, but hopefully know that this isn't like a closing of the door to topic, to any of these topics or conversations about them. I think it's always important to be talking about what's happening in our industry and what's happening in our company, both. And some of you, I think, are probably going to go a year without thinking about much of either of those, which is fine. But at any point in time, if conversation about either of those two things is helpful, know that I can speak for the rest of the staff and for Rex and I, we welcome that. So just let us know. Let us know when you find that helpful. Those of you that I'll occasionally get a text message that said, "Hey, I just got a question from a buyer. that I am like about the city or whatever that I'm baffled by. I love those conversations. So always let me know. Y'all, thanks for taking the time with, just a couple days notice and jumping onto a call this morning. I don't think I'll see or talk to most of you over the holidays. So happy holidays. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah. Have a great couple weeks. And we really look forward to hoping all of you can join us on January 7th. Thanks, everybody.